Well, I was asked to do a presentation on RMS versus P2P. And you know, I kind of thought about it at first. I go, oh, okay. They want to talk about AC waveforms. And so I finally figured, oh, no, I saw the word Winlink in there. And I figured, no, that's not what they want to talk about. But anyway, just in case you were thinking this was going to be about AC waveforms and RMS and peak to peak, what the difference is. RMS volts is equal to 0.707 times half of the peak to peak voltage. So, but that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. Instead, we are going to talk about Winlink RMS, gateways versus peer-to-peer operations, and making the best choice. And by the way, this is very informal, guys. I sit and do this all day long at work. I'm on calls, so I'm used to interactivity and people just asking questions when they want. So if you got any questions or you got any comments about experiences you've had with Winlink, then that would be great. I think it kind of makes things move along a little bit better, and we get to hear some of your experiences in the process. I like that effect. Sorry, guys, I had to put that in there.
You prefer a typed comment, or can we just chat like this?
You can chat. Just chat. Absolutely.
Just what does RMS stand for in this case?
Ah, it's coming up.
Okay.
I've got the slide coming up. Yep. No, RMS and the other one was root mean square, by the way. So, but who cares? We're not talking about that tonight. So anyway, this is this presentation is not about, it's not really a beginning Winlink presentation. It assumes you probably already know something about Winlink and you know how to use the software. You know, but if it is new to you, you'll still pick up some stuff and it could be useful. This is really a presentation about the use of Winlink's message types. We're going to talk about two of them. There's actually three, but we're only going to talk about two. We're not going to talk about the other one. We're just going to kind of hush hush to not even mention it. So, well, we'll mention it, but we're not going to really talk about it much. All right, some of the basic points about Winlink that probably most of you are already familiar with. Winlink is an email-like messaging tool, which means, and it's very similar to the other email tools that you use. If you use Outlook at work, or if you use Gmail or Yahoo Mail, it doesn't matter. I mean, all email user interfaces are pretty much the same. They look a little bit different, but they have a to, and they have a from, and they have a subject matter. And then they have the body of the message. So Winlink looks just like that. So it's very easy to learn. And that's really a nice thing about Winlink. It's designed to work with amateur radio, which makes it really nice for us guys. I assume everybody on here is going to be a ham radio operator. So it works great. I mean, that's its whole purpose, is to work with ham radio, and it can work without the need of the internet or cellular phone service if it has to. Sometimes it does use the internet. When we do RMS gateway connections, it's using the internet. But when we do peer-to-peer, we're not using the internet. So it's a really cool tool that we can all use. And it works great in MCOM modes. It's probably one of the best things that it's used for is in emergency communications, as well as big events. You know, you can use it on parades, you can use it on bicycle rallies, and you know, whatever type of big event that you have. And it works with multiple digital modes. So it's a pretty handy piece of software, which I'm sure all of you will agree if you've actually used it. Here we go. Here are the acronyms. RMS is a radio message server. A CMS is a common message server. And P2P is peer-to-peer. Yeah, no, I know the two is not a T, but you know, you kind of get the meaning there. The RMS, the radio message server, are the stations that are set up by individual hams, and they pay for all the hardware typically, unless it's a group putting it together. But a lot of times it's just individual hams who put out the money and the time to put together an RMS gateway station. Winlink provides the CMS hardware. CMS hardware is really just the Amazon Web Services. They have their servers residing on Amazon's service. So very hardened and, you know, very good. It's probably not, it's going to have a really good reliability, I'm sure, as a result. And Winlink also provides the Winlink Express client software and the software that the RMS gateway operators use. So that's what Winlink's part in all this is. But keep in mind that the hams are putting together most of these RMS gateway stations. And of course, the peer-to-peer hardware is radio to radio. So that's typically always going to be hams providing that. And sorry, I've had a lot of meetings today on the on calls, so my voice may not last too well today. We'll see how it goes. One thing you might want to do is show appreciation to your RMS gateway operators. These guys spend a lot of money, a lot of time, and give them a pat on the back every once in a while. Say thank you for all the service that you do for providing all these RMS gateways that we use.
Send cash.
Cash, give them cash. Do you take credit too, John?
I take anything.
All right, well, getting into it here, I think everybody's familiar with the Winlink Express, which software, which by the way, that's the one we're gonna pretty much refer to throughout this presentation because it's the most commonly used software. There are other software packages, which we'll kind of mention here in a bit. But the Winlink Express software is used by more people than anything else. So when you go into Winlink Express and you want to create a message, because it's a message program. So what's one of the first things you're going to do? You're going to create a message, right? That's your kind of the whole point of the thing. So when you go in to create a message, there's a little section up there that says send as. And as you probably know, it's a little drop-down box and you select between Winlink message and the format that we're not really going to talk about tonight called radio only. And the other message type is a peer-to-peer message. And so we're going to talk about Winlink messages and peer-to-peer message, but that's where, of course, you go to select the type of message that you're using. And these are the three types, kind of a general bullet points about each one. And let me turn on my pointer here real quick. Here we go. So we have Winlink messages over here on the left. It's the default message type. And by that, I mean that every single time you go into the software, and you go to create a new message, it's gonna come up as a Winlink message just automatically. Okay, even if the last time you went in there and created a peer-to-peer message, it doesn't matter. The next time you go into it, boom, it's going to show up as a Winlink message type again. So it's kind of the default, and that'll trip you up, I guarantee you, down the road. So just kind of keep that in mind that it's always going to default to that Winlink message type when you first go to create a new message. Winlink message types are used with Internet Telnet, with RMS gateways, and with RMS Relay Post Office. Now, if you haven't heard of RMS Relay Post Office, it's a really cool little program that Winlink provides. That, in fact, the RMS gateway operators run RMS Relay. But when you install RMS Relay on a PC, the first thing it's going to ask you is, do you want to install it in standard mode, or do you want to install it in a standalone post office mode? If you install it as a standalone post office mode, it has a really cool feature in that if you stick that out there on a mesh network or any other type of IP network, it can be a store and forward system for Winlink messages. It only accepts Winlink message types, but it's really cool. It's a nice little feature that you can kind of do. Just keep in mind, obviously, RMS gateways, they require internet access. But the cool thing about Winlink messages is you can address them to any valid email address. So it doesn't have to be another amateur radio call sign. It could be anybody's email address. That can be very, very handy. You can't do that with any of these other two. They can only go to a ham radio address or a call sign address. But with a Winlink message type, you can send it to a Gmail or whatever, Outlook, doesn't matter. You can send it to a business address, and those people can just reply back, and it will make its way back to you as well. So that's a really cool thing about Winlink message types. Peer-to-peer message types are not the default message type. Always got to keep that in mind. So if you ever want to do a peer-to-peer message, when you come down here to select your type of message under the send as dropdown, you always got to go down there and manually put it on peer-to-peer. Otherwise, it's going to be sitting there on Winlink message when you first open that up. Peer-to-peer is used for station-to-station connections, just kind of as its name implies. And of course, no internet access is required on either end. You can only address messages to another licensed ham radio operator. You cannot send it to somebody who just has a regular email address. They've got to be another call sign that's a Winlink valid call sign, somebody who has an account set up with Winlink. And this is the one we're really not going to talk about tonight because no one hardly ever uses it from what I understand. And I don't think I've ever seen anybody really use it, but it's called radio only message. But it's the third type. I'm not quite sure why they stuck it down here right as the second choice. I would have put it probably on the bottom, but anyway, It is used with what's called message pickup stations, and it's kind of cool. But it's really slow, and it really clogs up some of the frequency spectrum on HF because basically stations are sending the messages between themselves. And of course, it doesn't require any internet access, which is good. It was kind of intended for a case if there's a major internet outage, but you know, that doesn't really happen too often, but I guess it can. But it's hardly ever used. So we're really not going to talk about this one tonight. That could be for another presentation at some point. And but so we're going to just kind of ignore it. It didn't exist. All right. One thing that the message that you create, the type of message you create is very strongly related to the type of session that you open up within Winlink. So you know you can go in, you can create your message, but it's just going to sit there in your outbox. It's not going to do anything. You can write your message, prepare it, everything, stick it in your outbox, and it's just going to sit there forever until you open up a session and actually send the message. So under open session, you have these drop downs. Everything at the top where it has Winlink on the end is a pretty good clue that any one of these modes that you use is going to have to use a Winlink message type. If you're down here in the second section where it has P2P on the end of everything, that's a pretty good clue that you're going to have to use a peer-to-peer message type when you create your message. And then they hide kind of way down here at the bottom that doesn't even show up. Normally, when you first open this up, you have to kind of scroll down to get to it. Is that Telnet post office that I was talking about that runs RMS relay software? That also takes a Winlink message type. So you have to go down there to actually find that one. But it's very important that you realize that the session is very strongly related to the type of message that you're wanting to send. So if you're going to send a Winlink type message, you're restricted to using a session that's up here in this top part. If you're going to create a message that's for a P2P session, then you come down here and you have to open up a session as part of the peer-to-peer session. All right, pretty straightforward. So let's kind of look at this Winlink message flow as a whole and kind of step back and get away from the nuts and bolts there within the software and just kind of look at it as a big picture. A message flow is really simple. You have an originator who wants to send a message to a receiver. No problem. That's pretty simple. We all kind of understand that scenario. But in many cases, especially in the emergency communication world, and a lot of times in big events, there's an originator who isn't a ham. So they're the blue people here. And there's a recipient who isn't a ham radio operator. These are our served agencies. This is who you're out there providing communications for. And in that situation, which happens more often than not, actually, the ham radio operator really just becomes part of the communications path at that point. The originator doesn't care how the message gets to the recipient. He probably doesn't, or she doesn't understand ham radio at all, has no clue about what we do. They don't care. They just want to hand you the message and they expect it to get to the recipient. So at that point, we as ham radio operators become part of the communications path. And of course, it works the other way around. When the person that got the message originally wants to send a response back, then it just turns around and goes the other direction, and this person becomes a sender, and then this person becomes a receiver at that particular point in time. So the big question mark is about that communications path. Great, you know, you gave me a message, I've got to get it to this other person somewhere else. How am I going to make that happen? The number one question that you always have to start asking yourself at the beginning is, what is the best communications path for Winlink messaging? Pretty simple question, right? It's pretty obvious. And of course, the answer is it depends. And it depends on many, many factors. And we're going to talk about a few of those now. Let's first talk about peer-to-peer, because it really on the surface looks to be the easiest setup. Basically, in a peer-to-peer message situation, you have an originator and you have a recipient, and that's it. And these are both going to have to be ham radio operators with ham radio call signs. Keep in mind, remember that peer-to-peer messages can only go to ham calls. They can't go to just regular email addresses. So each person on each end is going to have to be a ham and have a ham call and have a valid Winlink account. You can do this connection either through RF, and that can be on HF, it can be on VHF, it can be UHF, or it can be on Telnet. Well, how do you do Telnet? Well, that gets back to a network that you've set up wirelessly. It could be a mesh network. It could be a non-mesh IP network. Or if you're ambitious and you're in a kind of a small area, if you want to go run fiber around an area, you could, actually do a wired cable network if you wanted to. So this looks very, very simple on the surface, and that's generally true. It's usually pretty easy to conduct a peer-to-peer type communication. But there's a few things you got to remember in peer-to-peer that come into play that might make you decide maybe this isn't the best thing that I want to do. Number one, the recipient has got to be running Winlink Express in peer-to-peer session. What that means is you can't just open up Winlink Express software and sit there and expect the message to happen. You actually have to go into a peer-to-peer session within Winlink Express. And a lot of people kind of forget that sometimes. They'll just open up the Winlink Express software and just sit there and say, hey, I haven't received a message from you. How come? Where's your message? I haven't seen it. And it's because they've never opened up a peer-to-peer session. If they do open up the peer-to-peer session, now they have to be in the same peer-to-peer protocol as the originator, the person who's sending you the message. So if the originator is using packet, then you've got to be in packet. You can't have the originator in packet and you be sitting in VAR FM. That's not going to work very well. So you got to make sure that you're both on the same protocol. Obviously, the recipient must be on the same frequency as the sender. And obviously this requires some sort of coordination between both parties. If this was just an ad hoc, suddenly pops up, how do these people know, what they're going to do? How do they know to go to peer-to-peer? How do they know which protocol they're going to use? How do they know which frequency to go to? Typically, you might coordinate that on a voice frequency ahead of time, or tell them, hey, we're going to be doing packet peer-to-peer on this frequency. Please go over there and get set up and go into a peer-to-peer session. So you can do that on voice channel, or you could have a standard operating procedure set up for your group if you're part of an Aries group or an Oxcom group. If you have a standard operating procedure that people just know what to go to in certain situations, then that's how you know. But you got to do that coordination between the two parties to make this work out, which is a little different than the Winlink Flow. Here's a Winlink Flow in generality. You have the message originator up here, and they're going to have to get out to the CMS servers. Every single Winlink message type has to go to a CMS server, except for, as we mentioned earlier, that RMS relay software that may be running on a PC. That'll also accept a Winlink message type, but that doesn't happen too often, so we're going to concentrate more on these CMS servers. This is what Winlink runs. This is Amazon, basically, web services that Winlink is using. So the originator has to get out here to these CMS servers, and it can do it through a couple of ways. It can do it through RF, going through a Winlink RMS gateway, either HF or VHF, and then that gateway is connected via the internet to the CMS server. Or, as we all often do when we're just sitting at home on our computers and we have internet access, we'll just access it through Telnet ourselves, and we won't go through an RMS gateway. The recipient has to connect to the CMS servers, and then the message flows to them once they connect, and there's a message out there that's waiting for their particular call sign or tactical call sign. Then they will receive that message. And then, of course, if they want to send a response, it just works its way back the other direction. So that's the basic flow for a Winlink message type. What happens when you send the message is it goes out here and it just sits on the server. It's not going anywhere. It's just sitting there being stored. It's just no different than Outlook or anything else that you might use, where really it just goes out there and sits on the Exchange server, and then your client software goes out there and polls it on a regular basis, say, hey, you got anything for me? You got anything for me? And if it does, it sends the email down to your client software. But same thing with CMS servers. Basically, when the originator sends the message out here, it's just sitting out here on the servers until the recipient goes out there and checks in, connects, and says, hey, you got anything for me? And if it does, then it's going to send the message down to the recipient. So that's a little bit different than the peer-to-peer that we just talked about. You don't have to have quite as much coordination involved. The originator could just send the message out here and it's on the servers, it's done. It's just sitting there waiting for the recipient to go pick it up. It's not so active to where the two have to be in constant contact with each other and say, hey, are you ready? I'm getting ready to send you a peer-to-peer message. This is a little more, I guess, informal in a way. You can just get the message out there on the server, and then this guy can just pick it up out here whenever they're ready to go retrieve it. So that's kind of a nice little part about a Winlink message type. It doesn't require this person to just constantly be sitting in a peer-to-peer session with their software. They can just load up the software, go out and connect to the CMS servers, either through the gateway or through Telnet, and receive the messages out there waiting for them. All right, let's look a little more at this Winlink message flow and a couple scenarios. In this particular scenario, where both the originator and the receiver both have an internet connection, well, keep it simple. Just use the Telnet Winlink on both ends, and don't use an RMS gateway. You can just use the internet. There's nothing wrong with hams using the internet directly. In fact, that's a very good way to do it because you're not tying up an RMS gateway when you're doing this, right? So you can just use the internet. Simple, it's easy. Life's good when you do that, right? Everybody can sit back and relax and drink their coffee and everything's really good. And always keep in mind that with the Winlink message flow, maybe this recipient on here doesn't have a ham radio operator with them. And remember, with a Winlink message type, the originator can send that message to any valid email address. So this recipient could be sitting out here and get that email from a Winlink sender without having to have a ham radio operator on this end. You can't do that with peer-to-peer. You can only do that with a Winlink type message. So that's a very powerful feature. So that happens fairly often, where the originator just sends it to somebody's personal or business address or government address, and they get the message and then they just reply back, and no ham radio operator is required over here. Well, what happens if one end doesn't have internet access? In this case, the originator does not have internet access, but the receiver does have internet access. In this case, the originator is going to have to use one of the RF Winlink session types to send a Winlink message to a Winlink RMS gateway, which the gateway will then send it to the internet, and then the receiver can use their Telnet Winlink connection to go out and retrieve the message off of the CMS server. Now, this is a little bit different. Remember, on peer-to-peer, how both stations had to be in the same mode in order to communicate with one another. In this case, it doesn't really matter because the CMS servers out here on Amazon kind of act as a buffer. They store the message and it just sits there. So how each end actually accesses that server doesn't matter. They can be using completely different means of accessing the server. So that's a nice feature of Winlink versus peer-to-peer. There's a little more flexibility with that. And of course, then the situation can be reversed. Maybe the originator has internet access, but the receiver does not. And so they have to go through a Winlink RMS gateway. Same situation, just reversed. Then you have the situation, of course, where neither the originator or the sender or the receiver has internet access. So they both have to access RMS gateway. So they're both using RF in order to get to the CMS servers that are out on the internet. Now, these gateways obviously do not have to be the same gateway. This one could be an HF gateway. This one could be a VHF gateway. It doesn't matter what frequency they're using for RF. Has no effect whatsoever. They just need to be on the right frequency and the right, for the whatever Winlink RMS gateway that they're using. If these guys are connecting to, say, W7DAV in Utah on HF, then obviously they need to be on HF. If these guys are using a local RMS gateway on VHF, then obviously they got to be on VHF. But again, it doesn't matter which gateway these guys use, because the gateways all commonly go back and dump their messages to the CMS servers on the internet. You may have the situation where actually both people are using RF. They don't have internet connectivity, but they're both using the same RMS gateway. This is an obvious happening in local events a lot of times. Because where are a lot of these RMS gateways located? They're often located up on mountaintops, or they might be located on top of a very tall tower. And so they have very good coverage. And it might be a case where these two people cannot communicate direct with one another, but they can both get into the RMS gateway. So they may, and it may be the only gateway that they have available to them. So they're both using this gateway to communicate with each other. And the gateway is still going out to the internet and then back again to relay that message to the other person. One thing to kind of keep in mind, and this happens a lot, and I've seen this happen on a number of events that we've done and a number of exercises we've done especially, you may have multiple receivers out here. This is a very common situation. This could be an EOC, and these could be shelters out here. So you may have multiple shelters trying to communicate back to an EOC, or this could be the start finish at a large event, and these are rest stops. And so you've got a lot of people, and they're all communicating back through one RMS gateway. Just beware of that and be cognizant of that, because when you get into this type of scenario, if you start having a lot of these people and there's a lot of messages going back and forth, that gateway is going to get very busy. And so just kind of keep that in mind, and just realize that you could be getting a bottleneck by going through one gateway. And just to mention again, this RMS relay software, which runs on a PC, which I think is pretty cool. It's the Telnet post office mode that you use down here. If this is a mesh network, or this is some other type of IP network, it doesn't have to be a mesh. It can just be point-to-point links, hub and star, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But it's really cool. All you have to do is hang one PC off of a node that's on the network, and that PC would be running the RMS relay software in that standalone post office mode. And as long as you know the IP address of that guy and you distribute that to the originator and the receiver, they can go into Telnet post office session, and they just put in the IP address of where that PC is located. And it's cool. I mean, they just send the message to that RMS relay computer, and it just stores that message, and the receiver goes out there and connects to it and says, oh, I got a message for you, and it dumps it down to them. So it's a store and forward type message handler that doesn't use the internet. And it's pretty cool, and it works really well. We've used this in a few occasions, and we've experimented with this, and it's great. It is really, really fast. It's almost faster than using the internet with Winlink Telnet. So nice little setup. So if you're in a situation where you have this situation, I would take advantage of it, because it's a very powerful mode. All right, let's look at P2P, peer-to-peer message flow, just real quick. This is the simplest setup that you can have. This is ideal. The sender can communicate directly with the receiver on HF, VHF, UHF, or microwave, doesn't matter. Somehow they can connect RF-wise between each other. Simplest way you can possibly do it. This is super reliable and works really well. But again, we have the drawbacks we've kind of mentioned earlier that we'll talk about again. Now, it is possible that the two cannot connect directly together, but on VHF or UHF or microwave, you could have a Digipeater. And it will allow you to, on packet or on VARA FM, to basically go from the sender to the receiver through a Digipeater. And you're still doing peer-to-peer messaging. You're just using a Digipeater to kind of extend that distance so that the two can actually communicate with one another. You can actually go up through 2 Digipeaters by default in the software in Winlink Express, using either packet or VARA FM. But beware, if any of you have ever done packet before, and I'm sure many of you have, whenever you start going through a Digipeater, things start to really slow down. And when you go through 2 Digipeaters, it really starts to slow down and can become a problem. Because again, where are these Digipeters normally located? They're located up on mountaintops. They're located up on high towers typically. So these guys hear a lot of other activity on the frequency that the originator or the receiver may not hear at all at their locations, but the Digipeater hears it. And Digipeters are courteous devices. They will not transmit on the frequency if they hear other activity on that same frequency. So just beware of this particular situation here. This oftentimes leads to a situation where the sender tries to send it through 2 Digipeaters, and it just never seems to get to the receiver. It times out, it gives up, and it fails. And it's because maybe this Digipeater here or this Digipeater here is hearing a lot of other activity on the frequency, and it basically their message just doesn't get through, and they just have to keep trying and trying and trying. So that can be a problem. And so you can imagine that if you have multiple receivers again out here, all trying to go through a couple Digipeaters, it can be very, very challenging. All right, as we kind of mentioned before, when you're in a peer-to-peer mode, you've got to pick the appropriate session down here. And you've always got to remember that the receiving station has to be in a peer-to-peer session at the time, and they've got to leave it open until the message has been received. And so it requires this coordination between the sender and the receiver. And of course, again, they've got to be in the same mode. So if the sender's in packet, then the receiver has to be in packet. If the receiver's in VAR FM, then or if the originator's in VAR FM, then the receiver needs to be in VAR FM. So you've got to make sure you patch the modes. And the whole thing here is it requires that coordination. So you just got to make sure you do that coordination somehow, some way between the two stations so that they know what they're doing when they're doing peer-to-peer. All right, if we back up a bit and just go back and look kind of at the broad picture again of the RF communications path, the ham radio operator in this particular situation has to understand all the variables involved in the communications path in order to select the best method for transferring that message. That bit isn't as quite as easy as it always seems to be. It's not always an easy thing to figure out sometimes, but there are basic questions you got to ask yourself. You know, where am I? Where are they? How far apart are we? What physical or geographical barriers exist between us? What communication tools are available on each end? What communication facilities like Digipeaters are available between us if there are any? What's the skill level and the licensing level on each end? Who is the recipient? What's their call sign? What's their tactical name, et cetera? These are all the kind of just basic questions you obviously have to ask yourself whenever you're getting involved in a Winlink communications situation for an event or for an emergency communication scenario. So very common sense stuff, but sometimes they're not so easy to answer. So like, where am I? If you don't know where you are, well, that's a big problem right there. So hopefully you know where you are all the time. Do you ask yourself, do you have VHF, UHF capability? Yeah, I do. Okay, well, if you do, are there RMS gateway stations that I can reach reliably? Maybe, maybe not. If you don't know, then that's a problem. If you do know, then great. You've got a good head start there. How much power am I running? What's my antenna system? Do I have HF capability? If yes, then how much power am I running there? What's my antenna? What bands can I operate on? You know, my antenna is at an endless antenna for 80 meters. Okay, well, it may work well on 80 meters, may do okay on 60 meters, may load up if you got your tuner that'll do that. But it may not be very good on any other band. So you got to kind of figure out what are all your capabilities and where you are. And then you got to figure out, well, where are they? And do they have VHF, UHF capability? And if yes, how much power are they running and what's their antenna system? Do they have a VHF, UHF, RMS gateway station within reach of their location? Are they close enough such that we can do peer-to-peer between us? And do they have HF capability? If yes, how much power are they running? What's their antenna? What bands can they operate on? All these questions you kind of have to run through your mind at some point to try to figure out what's going to be the best way to communicate. And based upon how you answer these questions could determine whether you're going to do peer-to-peer, because you just may not be able to. Or whether you're going to have to try to use RMS gateway stations. So kind of just looking at a little flow chart here, it's really pretty basic. So for peer-to-peer VHF, if you want to try to use peer-to-peer VHF or UHF communication, you just got to ask yourself some really simple questions. Do I have the capability? Well, if I don't, obviously it's not possible. Okay, if I do, and does the other station have the capability? No. Well, if they don't, well, then that's not possible. If they do, then are we within simplex range? And here's where you guys start considering things like power and antennas and the geography, what's between us. All right, so are we within simplex range? It seems like a simple question, but it's not always that easy to answer. But if you're pretty sure, yeah, we can, then peer-to-peer is possible in VHF and UHF. If you're not within simplex range, is there a Digipeater between us? If yes, then okay, it's still possible. If not, well, then you're not going to be possible. It's not going to be possible for you to do peer-to-peer on VHF or UHF. You go through the same kind of questions scenario with peer-to-peer HF. Do I have HF capability? No. Well, of course, it's not possible. Does the other station have HF capability? No. Well, it's not possible. And thing you have to consider there is the licensee. What if that person who's on there is using their call sign only has a technician license? Well, at that point, they really don't have HF capabilities, so it becomes impossible. But if both have HF capability, then you got to ask yourself the same question: are we within range? And again, and it gets a little more tricky on HF than it does on VHF and UHF, because we all know how finicky HF can be and how much it changes in propagation throughout the day and throughout the year. So that can be a really tricky question on HF, but you got to consider things like power and antennas and propagation situation and the geography to some extent. What if the other station's running, 5 watts? Well, okay, that could be a problem. Or the other station may have a fantastic antenna setup at 50 feet in the air for 20 meters on up. Well, it may not help you much if you need to use 80 meters to communicate with one another. So you got to kind of answer all these questions to figure out if it's going to be possible for you to do peer-to-peer on HF. If you're not within range, if it just isn't going to work, then it's not possible. So that's a tough one to answer sometimes on HF, as I'm sure we've all experienced over the years. For the Winlink message type, it's really pretty basic. Do I have internet access? Yes. Do they have internet access? Yes. Okay, fine. Just use Telnet. Don't make it difficult on yourself. Just go ahead and use the internet and use Telnet to make that happen. If I don't have internet access, then do I have access to an RMS gateway? If I do, then okay, I'll use an RMS gateway. Same thing on the recipient side. If they don't have internet access, do they have access to an RMS gateway? Yes. Okay, then they can use an RMS gateway. If neither one of you have access to the internet and neither one of you have access to an RMS gateway, well, that's your only choice left, is to try peer-to-peer at that particular point in time. So you just have to then give that a try and see if that will be successful. Some things to consider. If both the sender and the recipient have internet access, as we've talked about, just use a Winlink message type and use Telnet. Make it easy on yourself. Don't make it different or challenging. Just keep it simple and use Telnet. If using an RMS gateway, always be mindful of the possible load on that gateway, okay? Because if you're sharing the same gateway with a lot of people in the same area, then that can be a problem. You're going to overload that gateway. I've seen that happen on a lot of exercises between Aries groups, where they all want to do the exercise on the same day. And guess what? They all want to use the same broad coverage RMS gateway that's on the same frequency, and everybody gets on there and it just clogs down the frequency. And yeah, it becomes very troublesome and almost impossible to get a message through sometimes when that's the situation.
It also doesn't help when the multiple gateways are on the same frequency, hence the reason I started proliferating to different channels.
I agree. And that's a common problem, I think everywhere. Here in Colorado, in the Denver area, it's like 145.050 seems to have been the popular frequency. So what, everybody goes and plants their gateway on that frequency, and all the Digipeaters are on that frequency. And so that just opens it up to being really clogged on that one frequency. So it is good to kind of spread out if you can and put other gateways and other Digipeaters on some of the other frequencies, so that if one frequency gets overloaded, you can go to a different one. Or go.
There's actually 20 VHF frequencies, 21 technically, for packet.
Exactly.
So it's that you can spread out as much as you want.
And go between VHF and UHF, because a lot of people have UHF capability, so that's not a problem these days. So yeah, try to spread those out if you can, but it seems like everybody wants to gather on one frequency, I guess, because that's where all the Digipeaters are. So if they need Digipeat, they're all right there together on one frequency. But that becomes a problem then when you're doing a lot of our Winlink messaging through those gateways. Learn what Winlink resources are in your area. Become familiar with where all your gateways are and where all your Digipeaters are located, what frequencies are on. Start your own list if there isn't a list already available for you. Go to winlink.org and look at the RMS channels. They'll show you a map of where everything is. Go look at that occasionally. New ones pop up, and sometimes old ones go away. So, check it regularly and go keep track of that, so you always know what's available in your particular area. Same thing with HF. That gets a little bit tricky, but again, go out and practice on HF sometimes and see what stations you can connect to on HF. I know I've found which ones I can connect to on a regular basis, so I just kind of keep them in my favorites list. So same thing, you can't just at the last minute go out there and say, oh, I'm gonna go connect on HF. And if you've never done it before, if you're not really sure who you can connect to, that can become a problem. And there are some that just seem to be more reliable than others. So go play with that and learn which ones you can connect to on HF. Know your local geography. sometimes, and that's a tough one. You could be asked to go somewhere, for example, in an emergency communications exercise. You could go somewhere where maybe you're not real familiar with that particular area. Maybe you live in Colorado Springs and you're asked to go to Boulder or Fort Collins, and you get up there and they say, hey, we got a station we need you to connect to in Williams Canyon. I'm just making that up. You have no idea where, I have no idea where that canyon is. So I have no idea, what kind of, obstacles may be between me and them, but try to know your geography as best you can. You can't know every canyon and every little small city in a state, but, generally kind of know your geography. You know where the mountains are, you know where some of the locations are that might be pretty tough to get to because of geography. So just kind of keep that in mind and try to, go look at Google Maps occasionally and just kind of just study what's around you. And so you kind of got a feel for your surroundings, I guess you would say. Test known field locations. If you can, if you got the time, go to EOCs, go to hospitals. You can just go out in the parking lot of the hospital. You don't have to go in the hospital, just go to the parking lot, go in that general area, go to the shelters. If you're part of an ARES group, or a lot of times you have shelters that you already know where the shelters are located. So just go check them out. Go there and sit in your car and try to make connections back to an RMS gateway. Or if you get some buddies together, go try to do some peer-to-peer communications from those locations. Go to rest stops. If you know you got a big event coming up, a bicycle rally or whatever the case may be, maybe ahead of time, go out to those rest stops and do some tests and see if you can get back to some RMS gateways. Always keep your digital Go kit in working order, of course, that goes without saying, and test it regularly, and practice Winlink regularly to stay familiar with the software and keep it updated. Winlink's always being updated, and they're updating the forms, seems like almost every other day. There's new forms being updated. But they also update just the software itself on a pretty regular basis. So if you just practice on a regular basis and go out there and just start up the software, generally, if you've got it set to do this, it'll go out and check to see if there's a new version available, and it will download the new version for you. So it's good to keep up with the latest version of the software. Do things like Winlink Wednesday, perhaps, which is, by the way, tomorrow. You can go to winlinkwednesday.net, I believe is the website. And you can just go there and look. It's real simple. They don't ask you to do a lot, just to basically just check in. But it's a chance for you just once a week, go out there and just fire up your Winlink Express software, stay familiar with it, let it update the software and the forms. And so, yeah, just do that on a very regular basis. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take a lot of time. Practice using the local VHF, UHF RMS gateways, and the HF RMS gateways on a regular basis, kind of what we were talking about earlier. Just go out there and just try them every once in a while. Sometimes, things change. A gateway owner, may have changed an antenna, may have changed something about their setup that now changes maybe how well you can get into that station. Maybe you can get into it better. Maybe you couldn't get into it before, but now you can. Or you got into it okay before, but now you can't because they changed something. Or maybe they have an issue. And, these are things that if you kind of keep track of, keep a log of, boy, I can get into that gateway really good. And then 3 months later, you go out there and, wow, I can't get into that gateway hardly at all. It's a real challenge. So obviously something's changed. So kind of just practice on a regular basis if you can, checking into all the gateways on both VHF, UHF, and as many as you can on HF. Go out and educate others on digital communications. It's not as easy as pushing a push to talk button. There's a lot more involved in digital communication. So if you've got the time and the energy and the desire, just go out and try to educate others. Maybe have some formal classes if you're part of a group, and go out and try to teach people how to do digital communications, because it's not as easy as it sounds. And we all started out from the beginning at one point or another. And at some point, someone's got to kind of help you along, right? Because it can be kind of overwhelming at first to try to figure all this stuff out. Conduct regular exercises within your ARES, RACES, or OXCOM groups. Highly recommend that if you can. And develop a Winlink standard operating procedures within your group. Have a plan, have an SOP. If you don't have an SOP, then you really just don't have a plan. And so you're going to be just going out, you're going to be kind of just figuring it out when you go out in the field. But instead, have a good operating plan. And that way, when you go out there, you know what to do. You've got a process. You may not have to communicate too much by voice ahead of time. If you just, everybody knows what they're going to go do when they go set up in the field and do a Winlink setup. If you've got that SOP, then that helps an awful lot towards making your group way more functional. Always try to have a backup options. You know, we've talked about all these things, but what if you've got that nice, easy going internet connection and it goes away? Okay, always have backup options. Always think about, well, okay, yeah, I may be sitting here, I've got an internet connection right now, but what if I don't have it an hour from now? What am I going to do? What's my backup option? Do I have RMS gateways as a backup? Can I do peer-to-peer as a backup? Always to be thinking. It's almost like a pilot who's, as they're flying along, they always got to think, well, where, if I have a problem, where can I land? It's the same thing with us. You know, we need to be able to always be thinking, well, if what works now doesn't work 5 minutes from now, what am I going to do? And then just practice, practice, practice. You got to practice. Just keep doing it over and over and over again. Because if you don't do it, just all of us, we will all forget how to do things if we don't practice it on a very regular basis. And that's it. That's all I really had to say about this stuff. So hopefully that helped a little bit for some people. And yeah, does anybody have any questions or comments or experiences that they can share? Be more than happy to hear what you've experienced with Winlink.
Great talk. Thank you, Gary. I'd like to make a couple of comments. First thing is, of course, you mentioned it earlier, but you can actually send a Winlink message to any commercial account, right? So if you just send out to john@comcast.net, he can reply. However, there's a very big caveat there. The Winlink basically blacklists all commercial or non-ham accounts. So in order to be able to reply, either you have to explicitly whitelist the email that you want to allow, and whenever you send out a message, that message gets or that email address gets automatically whitelisted. So it's just important that when people reply to you, they have to reply to a whitelisted address. Otherwise, the Winlink software will kick that back, and you won't be able to pick that up with your RF gateway. The second very important thing is that the presentation talked about using the Winlink Express software, but the Winlink system works for many other kinds of software. So for example, I've never used Winlink Express, but I use Winlink all the time because I use something called BPQ, which runs on a Raspberry Pi. And then there's also, you know, PiPat and the various other pieces of software that could also use the Winlink infrastructure. None of that works with peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer means you have to use the RMS Express or whatever it's called now software. But the rest of the Winlink infrastructure, you can use, I can from a command line terminal telnet into a KPC3 and then connect to Winlink, and that will work also.
Yeah. Airmail used to be a popular program that was used in the past. It's still out there, and a lot of people are still using it actually. And it works quite well. We've used it a lot on the HF nets in the past. So it's pretty good. Still, it's old, but it's still working really well. PAT is a new one that a lot of people seem to be getting on board with, and it'll run on Linux and a Mac and Windows. So PAT's kind of an interesting one. The interface is totally different, but anyway, it's kind of fun. So yeah, there are definitely other ways in which to access the Winlink system.
Anybody else have got any other questions? Comments?
Nicely done, Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Gary.
Yep, thank you.
Gary, this is John Maxwell. Could you send me a PDF copy of your presentation so I can
Yes,
post
sir.
it?
I sure can.
I'm also going to cut this video down and I'll have it on the web in a couple of hours.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, there was lots of people that asked about having the talk posted because they wanted to watch it after the fact. They couldn't be here right now. So there's a lot of interest in that. I really appreciate it, Gary.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
There's Oh, no,
John, thank you for running your gateway.
I actually I have an HF gateway and a VHF gateway and UHF, but the UHF is rather deaf.
Yeah, I see a lot of people using your HF locally, actually, John.
You'd be surprised. I go look at the logs in there, and there is a swath of people from the Pacific Northwest down through Florida. There's nothing really north, and there's nothing really southwest.
Okay. What kind of antenna do you have on that?
It's got an R7 on it.
Okay. Huh. All right.
It's running 50 watts into an R7 at ground level at 8,400 feet.
Yeah, it's amazing how well it actually does locally. It's kind of surprising.
I see everybody though.
And Willem, yours does really good too. So appreciate you putting up your gateways. They work really well.
Yeah, I think the reason there's so much activity on 050 is just if you want to get to something in the Denver area, it's nice to have, a bunch of outlying stations, like for example, K8CTT's station in Elizabeth is often used as a digi from, somewhere around. So the advantage of being everybody on the same frequency is you can do the multiple hops. It's just
Right.
once everybody starts talking, it's hard to get a packet in sideways.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the price. Clogs up pretty quick. Yeah.
Right. And UHF actually seems to be doing quite a bit better between Wayne W0ARP station and mine at K0NTS. There's actually a remarkable amount of UHF activity as well.
Yeah, I think some of the guys in the Springs are able to get into Wayne's setup on UHF. So
Right.
on VAR FM, it's working really well.
Does he run VARA on UHF?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah, so he no longer runs the packet version?
I think
or
he has packet too. Yeah, I think
he
he still
runs
has
both?
both. Yeah.
On the same frequency or on different frequencies?
No, VAR is on a separate frequency.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, he still has 050 up and running.
he does. Yeah.
I digi to him sometimes.
Yeah, he's got a good setup there. He's got a good location for the most part. Yeah.
I've got people digiing through me from South Park to get into Denver.
And you're not even an official Digipeater, really. You're in a good location there, Walt. So that really makes a big difference. I was kind of hoping to hear of some people who maybe have used Winlink in events, certainly in emergency communication situations, and just how that experience went. A lot of people don't even use Winlink for events, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of things you can do with Winlink that's it's easy to do. It's very simple.
Well, as you well know, we always use it at the Dirty 30.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
But our experiences are kind of mixed, mostly due to operator error.
Right. Practice, 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 right?
Right.
Operator error and channel congestion, they'll jump up and bite you every time.
Yep.
So
I can only say that point-to-point microwave makes life a lot easier.
It does.
yes, but you have to be able to see. So that be an advertisement. I believe, what is the date, John? Is it June the 12th?
I believe it's the 12th. Let me confirm that.
Is the Dirty 30, which will be most likely be an Oxcom event, although I'm still waiting to hear the official announcement. But basically, it's a foot race where we have 8 stations staffed by various groups, and basically have a RFID reader that records all of the readings, which you can then access using just your web browser, which gives you a file that you then need to transmit to the start finish using typically Winlink, and we've typically used Winlink peer-to-peer mode for that. So if you're interested in actually using Winlink for real in some pretty challenging terrain,
Very challenging, yeah.
this is your opportunity to jump in. Well, we're almost at an hour, so I guess we'll wrap it up. Gary, once again, thank you very much to you and R1D5 for making this all possible, and we'll get this posted very soon for everybody else to see. So thank you very much again, and thanks for everybody for attending. Our next RMHAM University is on the 13th of March, and that is Doug and John talking about lightning protection. So again, if you want to leave your packet station up all the time and you would like it to stay up after the next lightning event, maybe that would be a good one for you all to attend. Thank you all again for coming, and thanks again, Gary.